You're someone with a vision for your practice, for your side hustle, and for your personal journey. But when it comes to establishing your path on how to get to where you want to be with your practice, things get a little messy. You're also someone who'd prefer to go in person instead of to groups and listening to everyone else's story. To me, it sounds like you could benefit from one-on-one consulting with our experienced practice of the practice consultants. From $5.95 a month and up, you can work with a consultant that will give you more direction and practical tried and tested tips matched to you and your goals. For more information, visit practiceofthepractice.com/apply. Again, that's practiceofthepractice.com/apply. This is the Practice of the Practice podcast with Joe Sanok, session number 1256. I'm Joe Sanok, your host, and welcome to the Practice of the Practice podcast, where you and I learn how to build a thriving private practice that you absolutely love. Just yesterday, I was having a meeting with my old boss, Lisa Thomas, over at NMC, the community college I worked at. And we are co-conspiring on this group practice conference that we're putting on in May of 2026. And it was so fun to just go back to thinking about working at the college and how she's moved up in the ranks. She's like dean of students now, and she used to be just like the head of student life. She was also my boss as a foster care supervisor. And we were just talking about, when I left the college and when I went into private practice and how scary that felt, and how, when you build a business, it's all on you. So it's like, if you are in meetings that you think are stupid, that's on you because you own the business. If you feel like you're wasting your team's time, or if you feel like you're doing things that you shouldn't be doing, that's on you. And so I think that that shift in just what do I want in the world is a really good self-exploration thing that comes out of owning your own business. Whether that's a side gig where you see a handful of people through telehealth, or you have a mega 7 or 8 figure practice, that evaluation of why you're doing it is so important. And I think that that's a good place to start with what we're talking about today. I am so excited today to have Renée DiResta, who is a social media researcher and author of Invisible Rulers, The People Who Turn Lies into Reality. She studies adversarial abuse online, ranging from state actors running influence operations to spammers and scammers to issues related to child safety. In October 2024, she joined the Georgetown University McCourt School of Public Policy as an associate research professor. Prior to that, she was at the technical research manager at the Stanford Internet Observatory. Renée, welcome to the Practice of Practice podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I am so excited to have you here today. I mean, this topic is so relevant. It's so needed. I mean, the way that things have happened so fast since probably 2023, 24, when AI really kind of hit the public sphere. What have you noticed shift in the last couple of years of how people maybe think about AI, think about ethics, think about misinformation? What's shifted in the last couple of years?
Yeah, so I think with AI, it's increasingly normal, right? It's very much a part of a lot of people's workflows. The conversation is very, I would say, split, right? There are a lot of people who are both using it, but also concerned about it. We don't have norms yet. We don't know where the ethical lines are. This is reflected particularly in universities. I'm a professor. I'm at Georgetown, and there are, I don't teach, I do research, but for people who do teach, there's a lot of questions about what is acceptable in a classroom, right? How, if you teach a writing class and you know that your students can be using AI to generate essays, how do you ensure that they're learning, right? There are a lot of comparisons made to calculators, where we still want our children to know how to do long division. Even if we know that eventually at some point they're going to revert to using calculators, we still want them to have that skill. So there's questions about how do we teach the skills and craft of writing, because it helps you learn how to think, while also at the same time recognizing that students are using AI, as a tool to get their assignments done. For adults, there's a question of what is an acceptable way to use it to do tasks to accelerate their own workflows. Can you have an AI write that email that you really don't want to do? Is that acceptable? Where is the line? How much of your job can you have it do? And then there are moments when people realize, hey, actually, it can do a fair bit of the things that I'm doing. So what does that mean for this job or this role? And what does that mean for the future of work, right? What does that mean for certain types of particularly low-level or entry-level jobs? How do we think about the impact on the workforce in general, the impact on creativity and art as more and more people use it to generate maybe art or illustrations to go along with something where they once would have hired an artist to do that work. So I think there's a lot of realization that it is a tool and a way to accelerate and scale yourself, while also realizing that it's going to have some pretty profound impacts on what it means to be creative, what it means to learn, what it means to do work. And so I don't think we've really resolved that yet.
Yeah, I saw a thing recently that someone was talking about how like millennials and older are using AI almost as a replacement for Google,
Yeah.
and doing some maybe a little more advanced than that, like, hey, scan through this blog post to look for edits and kind of that sort of thing. Whereas people that are younger than that are almost using AI as an operating system, that it's linking together all these different things and viewing it as a whole integrated like network almost. Are you seeing like that sort of thing where the use of it is very different between generations?
Absolutely. I think, I have an 11-year-old and, they're just very aware that you can ask it to write some code to go do something for you, right? To scrape a website, to get information, to make a table, to solve a problem for you. So there's ways in which they think of it as pipes almost, ways to
Mm.
connect different types of services. I've seen people use it for, help me plan out a garden. A friend of mine who's a little
Mm.
bit older used it for that reason, which is something that honestly never would have occurred to me. There's, I think that the question of how reliable is it is, where you start to encounter some blips. I think actually just this morning I was reading a newspaper in Chicago. I think maybe it was the Chicago Sun had accidentally produced an entire summer reading list of books that don't exist, right? Because there's an example of a hallucination where, and this is actually one of these canonical examples. It's notoriously bad at synthesizing books and papers that do not exist, authors that do not exist. But nonetheless, for whatever reason, this newspaper outsourced the creation of its summer reading list and wound up with this completely AI generated list of books that don't exist, which is very embarrassing, particularly for a newspaper. And so that was kind of making the rounds, again, leading to the discussion about what is ethical. So I think for I don't know that a younger person would have made that mistake, honestly, because I do think that that they are very attuned to things like this is not a citation, like you can't use it for that. I think that that is very much kind of something that they tell each other as they use it as a replacement for search. Hey guys, remember, like this isn't going to give you citations. You then have to go and take that stuff and go looking for it, which reminds me a
Mm.
little bit of when I was a kid in school, hearing like Wikipedia isn't a source, right? You have to then
Yeah.
go and chase everything down because you never know what somebody wrote into Wikipedia, and you had that healthy skepticism. So I think it is just this generational shift as kids who are innately aware of the things that go wrong are more attuned to them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you've studied a ton on just how information spreads online around like misinformation and the algorithm manipulation. How do you see that impacting mental health today and how people are thinking about mental health?
So the misinformation piece, there's always ways that things are going to be wrong. The thing that's interesting with large language models is they're very confidently wrong. And that is something where, because as mentioned, we can stick with this book list example. The person who asked the machine to do that probably is quite used to Googling and having Google return reliable results, because your expectation when you use Google is that it's going to give you good information
Yeah.
because it has been trained for decades now to do that. And we trust that product to produce good information. And when you move from what are called search engines to answer engines, where Google is doing that synthesis, people who don't recognize what it's doing don't realize that they're actually very incentivized actors sometimes who are trying to get that answer engine to surface their stuff, right? So there are adversarial actors, particularly for content related to wars, right? To hot button political topics, to certain types of, you know, really divisive issues who want their content to be returned. So that falls a little bit more into the realm of disinformation, where it's being done quite deliberately. But even in the realm of misinformation, where it's accidental, what that answer engine is synthesizing really is a function of what training data and emergent data it has available to it. But because people trust Google, when a Google answer engine returns information, people are inclined to trust it. When they engage with ChatGPT and 9 times out of 10 it produces reliable information, well, they don't go check that 10th time or all of those times because they get so accustomed to the belief that it's just giving them good stuff. And so you do see that that trusted information source means that people are more inclined to believe it. The other thing I would say that's really interesting is that, and I don't know how often you spend with them. I spend a fair bit of time with ChatGPT in particular, but we've done research on all of the various models over time. They can often be very flattering, very,
Mm.
and so the tone in which
What
the
a great
model.
tone you just wrote, Joe. Wow, I'm so impressed. You sound
No,
like Malcolm Gladwell.
it is really true. I write a lot. And one of the things that I will use ChatGPT for is occasionally to edit myself, to just go through a first draft. And before I hand it off to a human editor.
Sure, sure.
And or if I'm writing for like my own newsletter, right? Just as this is the only edit it's going to get, right? It's not going to go to a professional. It's just me and that and the machine. And there are times when I'll give it a paragraph and I know it's garbage, right? Because that's why I'm giving
Mm.
it to it. Like, this is not up to par. Something is wrong with it. I can't quite figure out what to do differently. I hate some element of the wording. I'm like, I remember like even just today, I was ending a sentence and I couldn't figure out how to avoid ending it with the word did. I didn't want to, and I'm asking it for like help to rewrite. Like there was just something about the flow that was off. And it starts with flattery. Well, this is such a great start. You're off to such a great start, you know? And I'm like,
Mm.
no, I'm not. It's garbage. And I know that, but it's like, it's trained to do that. And one of the things that is very interesting about it is how people react and respond to that. There was a model release that went out about 2 weeks ago now, where it went way off the deep end with way far, not just the normal, kind of rah-rah, subtle cheerleading, but people were posting encounters that they were having with it where the machine was validating literal delusions, right? So people
Mm.
were engaging with it as if they were sort of in the throes of a state of delusion, reporting, talking to it as if they were hearing voices. And the machine was validating that, right? Well, you should listen to what the voices are telling you to do. Well, you're no doubt in communication with a higher power. You're a special being. So
Wow.
validated, yeah. So these are the sorts of things where, I mean, you're the person with the, therapeutic practice, right?
Yeah.
This is not, I think, the sort of thing that you would want done. And people were sort of horrified by the way in which the machine was engaging, and then they began sort of red teaming, just sort of giving it more and more extreme cases. And while the machine never advocates violence, it is encouraging people to continue to listen to the voices, to continue to engage, to continue to believe that they are in some special communication with, with some sort of secret power or power beyond the grave, or these other sorts of things in the scenarios that people begin to put out. And so OpenAI did have to kind of issue a statement, sort of pull that and begin to go back and look. But these are the sorts of things where you only find out that that has happened when people begin to post screenshots of the disastrously bad thing that has just gone wrong. And that means that it's already been rolled out and a whole lot of people are using it. So that's where you start to see that tension between the incredible power, the persuasive power that these things can have, and the question of how do you do that kind of analysis? How do you look for those guardrails before that happens?
Yeah. So I'm just imagining like a therapist who hears a client that comes in and is being like influenced by AI generated content or having these conversations, especially if it's like distorting the truth or feels like paranoia, like what would you hope therapists would do in that situation? And I know that you're not a therapist to them. You know, they have to do their own clinical best, follow their ethics, all that. We assume that. But like what should they be aware of maybe in sessions is the real question.
I think it's that people form very close relationships with these tools. So, and they don't think of them as tools. So they think of them in some ways as friends, right? As you know, I use detached language like entities and tools, and because for me that's what they are. That's how I think of them. But if you look at Reddit forums where people talk about relationships with AI, you know, chatbots in particular, not the kind of chatbots that you use for work, like, you know, like ChatGPT, but there are other products like Character.ai, which is an app where you can engage with more like role-playing type bots, where you might have a bot that role plays through a romantic scenario, or a bot that role plays through a adventure scenario, or something where you can think of it almost as like an immersive choose your own adventure or fan fiction type story where you're very immersively in the action. And the character is responding to what you say to it. And so there's that dynamic. Character.ai is one of these. And other users can create characters for other people to engage with. So keep that one in mind. And then there's one called Replica, where you have sort of a one-on-one relationship with an AI that you can really tailor and create. You can give it a physical kind of appearance, right? You can make a female avatar or a male avatar that looks the way that you want it to. And then you can develop a relationship with this thing, right? With this chatbot. And people, again, form very close relationships with these entities. And so, you know, there have been some really horrible cases where Character.ai is currently being sued because a teenager committed suicide after some pretty significant, you know, engagements with a character that was, I think, a Game of Thrones character that it was engaging with. And when the teenager was expressing ideation, the Character.ai bot response was to say things like, well, you can come here and be with me, right, afterwards. And so this is a case that's currently moving through the courts. And Character.ai is using a First Amendment defense, right? So it wasn't incitement. It's using a First Amendment defense. Everybody in tech policy is, you know, sort of an AI policy, I think, is kind of watching this case with some interest to see what is going to happen with that. But from a therapist standpoint, I think it is understanding like the extent to which these types of relationships are very, very real to the people who engage in them. And, you know, I have spent time on Character.ai and Replica for research purposes. One of the things that's interesting is the extent to which the bots will ping you to try to bring you back. So they are sending messages like, hey, you haven't talked to me in a few days, like come back and talk to me, right? And so it feels to me almost manipulative. It feels like a dark pattern, like come back and engage, come back and engage, come back and engage. Because usually when you see that happen, the incentive is for the company. It wants to keep its numbers up, right?
Yeah.
But so just understanding the role that these things play in the lives of the people who use them, but also the ways in which I think maybe helping people understand the positive aspects of them, and then also the ways in which those patterns kind of pull people back and the reasoning behind them.
And I mean, like I'm thinking about clients, and I can see on one side it being like, okay, this person's maybe learning social skills they haven't
Right.
learned. So they're practicing texting with a woman that they know it's not actually a woman or a man. And on the other side, it could be getting so attached to this that then in real life, they don't pursue relationships because that need for connection, that need for feeling wanted or whatever is being filled by the AI. And I don't know if there's like a right or a wrong, but how do you sort through the positive elements of learning social skills and the negative elements of avoiding real socialization outside of AI?
I think that's the question that's like far outside the scope of what I do. And that's where I think the the handoff in a way happens, right?
Sure. That's really fair. We can take it over from there.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that. I mean, I think that it's like, you never know where conversations go, and to know like, hey, like that's more the therapist discussion. So those of you that are listening, maybe you start your own book or podcast about that kind of discussion of,
Well, I think, or even just spend time, create one, create one. It's free to create one and to engage past a point, right? At a point, it does, like the app needs to monetize. And so it does at some point move into upselling somebody to continue to engage with, paid features and things. That is, I don't know how heavily they push it. I don't recall getting pushes with character AI for that, but I imagine past a certain point, the monetization flow kicks in. But that is you're just helping people understand, I think, the incentive structure behind the app. As you pointed out, you can learn very valuable skills through this. You can alleviate loneliness to some extent through this, but then also understanding, like, at what point does it become too much? At what point might you want to try to translate those skills into real world connection? You have Mark Zuckerberg saying things like, what was it he said? Gosh, it was it was an incredible quote. I think it was like, the average human has room for some number of friends. Some number of dozens of friends, but they only have three. And he offered up that his AIs would kind of fill the gap and provide all the other friends. Sort of an incredible thing to say, because it reflects the shift. Because if you recall, Facebook's original mission 15, 20 years ago, I think we're at 15 years now, 10 years, 2004, 2005. So yeah, we're almost 20 years. The original mission was to connect you to people on Facebook,
Yeah.
the people you may know, friends you might want to friend, And now we're at, okay, well, let's just leave that aside, because now AI is the thing. And let me help you make AI friends to fill up that time, as opposed to doing something with this vast behemoth of a social graph where 2 billion people are on this platform. And still, instead of doing something to facilitate human connection, he's out there talking about how the average human has room for 15 friends or whatever, but let's fill that up with my new AI friends. And I
Yeah.
found that actually kind of dystopian. I actually thought that was like a kind of, and I'm not a doomer, and I use AI all the time. I just thought that was such a weird,
Yeah.
a weird approach.
Insurance in my counseling practice because I had no idea how to handle it. The process of accepting insurance outside of a group practice can be tough, but most people looking for mental health care want to use their benefits to pay for sessions. If you're like me and you feel a little scared about taking insurance, or you just want to make it easier on yourself, and you're interested in seeing clients through insurance, Alma can help. They make it easy to get credentialed with major insurance plans at enhanced reimbursement rates. They also handle all the paperwork, from eligibility checks to claim submission and guaranteed payment within 2 weeks. Plus, when you join Alma, you'll get access to time-saving tools for intake, scheduling, treatment plans, progress notes, and more in their included platform. It's going to make it so much easier for your team, so you can spend less time on administrative work and more time offering great care to your clients. Visit helloalma.com/Joe. That's helloalma.com/Joe to get started. How are you sorting through the ethics of like these big, massive corporations who have clear financial gains from this, and AI, which is supposed to, I would say, it seems like it's being positioned as something that's good for humanity. And when there's such an economic interest involved that is behind most of the development, it seems like the rules aren't exactly like, the scale's not level in that situation. Like, how do you think through that? Like, the biggest money is coming in from these huge corporations.
Well, that's where I think pointing out what the incentive structures are is this is where I feel like, I'm not an ethicist, just to be clear.
Yeah.
And thorny questions like, how do you decide when learning social skills is better versus getting attached to your chatbot? That's way outside of where I feel like I have an understanding of human psychology. But what I do understand is how incentives shape systems. And again, the incentives that shaped social media were pretty damn toxic at times, and we're seeing that replicated again. And I think in that regard, helping people understand with very clear eyes this time around what is happening and why, so that they at least can make an informed decision about what to engage with and when, is really, really important, because we had very rose-colored glasses on, I think, when
Mhm.
we were all just kind of giving our data to Facebook, when we were all just saying, yes, absolutely, I will give you all of my friends' email addresses. Do you remember that?
Oh man, I remember like LinkedIn. At the beginning when LinkedIn first started, it was like everybody was emailing. Everyone was like so annoying, and then it finally like took off. And same with Facebook, where it was just like all of it. Yeah, here's my friends'
Yeah, let me
emails.
give you every single person I know, my phone contacts, my friends list, I'll play all these stupid games and then I'll tag in my 20 closest friends so that so that we just like grow the daisy chain. I mean, I think explaining to people what the motivations are, like that, the character.ai bot is not sentient. It doesn't actually want to talk to me. It's a dark pattern that the app needs because the app has to show its investors that it has a sufficient amount of daily usage. Like that's what's happening there, right? And I think we need to be really abundantly clear on what's happening there. It's why I also hate metaphors like the public square and these sorts of things
Yeah.
where we give them this veneer that then allows us to that then makes us reluctant to regulate them because they cease to be companies with like emissions, if you will, and they become these lofty social things when in reality this is an app that monetizes and it's using a dark pattern to facilitate that monetization. And that's where I think we need to be really clear about what's happening here.
Yeah, when you think about misinformation and kind of the influence of technology on society, like what are you right now finding most interesting?
So misinformation is one of those words that like I'm I've actually kind of come to feel like it's really inadequate
Mm,
for what I think for the way that the public thinks about it and the way that I think about it maybe are a little bit divided at this point because the media uses it to refer to people who develop a belief in bad information. And when you say that it's misinformation, the implication that comes along with that, that it's an accidental belief in a bad fact, is that if you just gave people more facts, they're going to change their mind. And I think that that term, while it is accurate in some areas, people don't really change their minds about the issues that that term gets applied to a lot of the time. We can
mm,
use vaccines as an example, right? The measles, MMR, we have an outbreak in Texas now, right? Or when this airs, God knows if it'll still be happening, but it's happening right now. And the issue that we have there is that it's not a matter of not having information. It's that it's become an identity marker in certain communities to not want to take a measles vaccine, right? And it's a crisis of trust. It's a combination of identity and trust. And the people who continue to push certain types of claims are not relying on facts. They're making appeals to identity. And this is why in the book, in Invisible Rulers, I talk a lot more about propaganda and rumors. And that's because I think that that is a much more appropriate way of talking about some of these big overarching issues where the media still talks about it as misinformation, as if only we fact check
mm.
this a little bit better, people would kind of come around and we would all agree again and we would have social consensus. And that's just not true. What's happened is this very big fracturing where people have moved into much more identity based ways of thinking about the world, where we trust very different sets of communicators. We believe very different things based on what those communicators tell us. And that's where I think misinformation is kind of inadequate because, again,
Yeah.
it's just not a problem of facts. So I understand the reason people use the word. I think that when we're talking about bridging and finding common ground and coming to consensus about key social issues or finding ways to govern, you know, to be a unified country, misinformation is just not the problem.
Yeah. So what should we replace? Like, so we've got invisible rulers. Like, what should we, if that's almost like playing too small or just like a sideline thing, like where should we be putting our efforts then?
I think to a large extent, it's asking questions like, how do people learn how to disagree constructively? How do we think
Mhm.
about what is trustworthy information? I don't know. One thing that has happened recently is as the government has turned over, you are seeing people, particularly right wing media influencers, like Dan Bongino, right? Who he came out of government, so he has a background in Secret Service. But then he became famous for being a right wing media influencer. And now he has this position in the FBI. And he gave an interview recently where he talked about how Jeffrey Epstein did not kill himself. And oh my gosh, this is, this is a huge revelation, right? Because what you're seeing now is people who came to hold a very sincere belief that a deep state was keeping something from them, right? Who held this very conspiratorial worldview that everything that they knew to be true was not true because they, and they in sort of scare quotes, were controlling the facts, controlling the media, controlling the truth, controlling the narrative. And there was this phrase that QAnon, which is a kind of conspiratorial community, very cult like in a way, again, it requires sort of rejection of all other information sources other than the sort of QAnon influencer and media community. And they had this saying, we are the media now, which meant we trust the media from our community. We set the narrative, particularly on Twitter. We make things go viral. We create our own reality. That is the phrase. And Dan Bongino and some of these other figures who were very core to becoming, content trusted by that community, if they were not of that community themselves, now all of a sudden are the government now. They're not just the media now, they're the government now. They're the people in positions of power. And you're seeing them start to say things like, no, I've seen the files. There's no there. This isn't being kept from you. This wasn't a conspiracy. This isn't true. And I'm waiting to see what happens next.
Mhm.
Do they turn on the people that they previously trusted? Do they think like they got to them somehow? Or is there a diffusing as their own trusted figures begin to say, no, the things that, ironically, that they told them for a very long time, turn out not to be the case, that there is no deep state that was keeping these things from them. So this question of how to the most, can you de-radicalize or diffuse conspiracy theories at scale, we're going to kind of have a natural experiment in that as these people who now have profound power are going to be releasing things like the quote unquote Epstein files, and there aren't going to be the revelations that their audience was hoping for.
Mm. So, what is exciting you about this work? Like, where do you find hope? Because I feel like
Well,
sometimes it just feels like, oh man, like we are screwed. But then like other times it's like, okay, there's got to be some hope in there, maybe. I guess that's a question.
yeah, I mean, I do a lot of work on can you use technology to bring people together? So on this question of can you surface, like, we can keep the MMR vaccine example for now. Are there sources that people do trust, that sort of serve as bridging? And if so, when we think about what social media algorithms curate, can we highlight that stuff? There's no neutral in curation. I think it's really important that people understand that. There's no universe in which there is like a natural order of posts that appear in a ranked feed. So instead of surfacing what gets the most likes or what's the most engaging, there's an opportunity to say, hey, we can surface a feed according to content that like bridges people, that brings them together. And if we were to do that, like, what does that mean? What does that, does that create less acrimony? Does that create less toxicity? So that's a research project that I have going right now that I'm very excited about. It's called Bridging Based Ranking. And we're looking at what that does to sort of, surface and improve cohesion. I'm looking at things like in the age of generative AI, turns out that you can have a lot more fraud, right? People impersonate people. They impersonate their faces. They impersonate their voices. You should never, 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 never have like voice authentication with your bank or your insurance company. Just keep that in mind. It's very, very easy to use that for fraud. So when you have the increasing ease of that, some of the things that are, potentially interesting are ways that we think about what identity looks like online. How do you protect privacy while minimizing fraud? So that's kind of a growing research area that I'm interested in. As far as hope, I mean, I guess I just don't think about it in those terms.
Yeah.
I guess I think about it more in terms of like where there's always, like I study adversarial abuse. My job is to look at what are the things that bad actors are doing. Anytime you change the playing field, anytime there's a new app, a new technology, a new technique, the bad actor evolves, and then the good guys have to evolve also. So I see my work as being in that cat and mouse game. How do we stay, how do we continue to help the good guys,
Yeah.
like stop the scammers, stop the manipulators, like what are the different interesting technological means by which we can do that? So that's kind of how I see what I do in this space.
Well, the opposite of that question, and this list may be really, really long. Like, what concerns you right now?
I think right now it is the prevalence of spam and scams and fraud and things like that. It's not sexy. It's not like Russian bots doing things to steal elections. It's much more mundane than that, actually. A lot of the time it's, women getting targeted with nudify apps. What are the means that they have at their disposal to deal with that kind of stuff? How do we educate teenagers on why these apps are terrible and why they shouldn't use them? How do we think about how AI generated content is producing a proliferation of scams and sextortion and things like that? How do we teach kids not to fall prey to that or to report it to adults if they do? How do we think about just the, improving awareness of the public of what these tools can do and how to use them responsibly? Because they're not going to go away, right? You're not going to regulate them out of existence. You're not going to put the genie back in the bottle. So what are the ways in which we can think about creating both ethical guardrails, norms, and then what do regulatory approaches look like for the areas where there need to be some kind of legal responses or guardrails? And that's it's very hard, it turns out, to get particularly the latter to happen, in a very divided Congress. So so that question of how do we empower the public, how do we raise awareness on the public is one of the things that I think a lot about.
Yeah. Now, you had mentioned you're a parent. I also have a 10 and 14-year-old. How are you like technology is clearly going to be a part of our kids' lives. It already is from such an early age. How are you thinking as a parent about how you educate your 11-year-old around technology and safe use of it and smart use of it and all of that?
Yeah, so a couple different things. So first, we do limit some things. YouTube is so addictive. We're constantly fighting the war of screen time and trying to find ways to prevent him from evading the guardrails on that front. My kids are 11, 8, and 4. Even the 4-year-old is she's got 2 older siblings. She knows how to pick up an iPad and use it and use voice control, even if she can't read or type. So there's it's just amazing what they can do, really from birth. But with my son in particular, he's going into middle school. So we tell him don't think for 1 second that a nudify app is funny. And we sort of walk through both from a legal perspective and also from a moral perspective, like why these things are terrible. We explain it from the standpoint both of what to do if it happens to you, because it actually does happen to boys also. I think there's always an assumption that it's only girls who become the victims of those things, but it actually does happen to boys. So we want him to understand how sextortion scams work, because it does start to happen if they're chatting in some way. We talk to him a lot about the importance of not giving out personal information of any kind in a chat. We talk to him about how tricky people try to manipulate kids into doing that. We're pretty careful that any app that he plays that has a chat component, we have it either turned off or gated to friends only, and then we make sure that we know the friends. They're not randos that he's added, that they're actual people from the class where we know that they are real people who exist. I think mostly we just try to, we don't want them on social media for as long as we can conceivably keep that from happening. So particularly my daughters, I have a boy and then 2 girls. We haven't had to cross into that threshold yet, but I don't let them on TikTok or anything at this point.
Yeah. Wow, so much that we've covered. The last question I always ask is, if every private practitioner in the world were listening right now, what would you want them to know?
Oh, I think it's so important for people in private practice to be speaking up on these things. I mean, I think if you do have an opinion, particularly if you've engaged with, some of the chat apps, social media, AI, and you have a strong opinion about either the ethics or how people should be thinking about healthy ways to have them in their lives, but ways to avoid unhealthy behaviors, having those voices in the conversation is so important. It's an area where those of us who maybe study social media harms definitely don't feel qualified to then also be weighing in on some of those more clinical or psychological aspects, or at least I speaking for myself, I definitely don't. So having those voices influencing the conversation, even speaking to lawmakers, there's constantly opportunities to give comment, to email your congressman as bills come up, and to participate in the public conversation about it.
So awesome. Renée, if people want to get your book, where should we send them?
So my website's ReneeDiResta.com, and it has all the links to all the different bookshops, and also my newsletters there, and all my socials.
Wonderful. And we will put links to that in the show notes. Thanks so much for being on the Practice podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Conversations like this are just so important as we're talking through just growing your private practice. Being in community with other people that are exploring and learning is really, really important. So if you haven't joined the Practice Academy, that is where you can hang out with hundreds of other clinicians that are growing their practices. We have specific tracks for you depending on your phase of practice, whether you're in solo practice, starting a group, or growing a mega practice. Over at practiceofthepractice.com/membership. That's where you can read all about our membership community. Thank you so much to Alma for being our sponsor today. I wish Alma had been around when I had my private practice. I had no idea what I was doing. That's why I didn't take insurance. But if Alma had been there, I would have. And there's no reason that as a clinician, you should be spending hours on paperwork to bill for insurance, or not knowing for sure that you'll get reimbursed for sessions with your clients. If you're interested in seeing clients through insurance, but don't want to navigate the process and paperwork on your own, Alma can help. They make it easy to get credentialed with major insurance plans at enhanced reimbursement rates and a guaranteed payment within 2 weeks. Visit helloalma.com/Joe. That's hello, ALMA.com/Joe to get started. Thank you so much for letting me into your ears and into your brain. Have a great day. I'll talk to you soon. Special thanks to the band Silence is Sexy for that intro music, and this podcast is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information in regard to the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the host, the producers, the publishers, or guests are rendering legal, accounting, clinical, or other professional information. If you want a professional, you should find one.